there are no such organization like ATREE, which is a think tank, because we are a think tank. We do extensive research in terms of biodiversity. In fact, we started out biodiversity, but eventually we moved to water and climate change, because all of them are intertwined into each other. And we felt that that is how the overall ecology aspect is being taken care of.
Hi everyone. Today we have with us Mr. Vamsidhar Pothula, who is an industry agnostic and transformation leader with a track record of driving growth, development, and sustainability, managing extensive and complex operations, and building engaged teams from scratch. Passionate about digital transformation, technology evangelism, environmental, social, and governance, and AI adoption. He holds expertise in emerging markets with proven credentials in end-to-end operations and change management across the value chain. He is currently involved in education management, the non-profit leadership, ecology and environmental sector, and mentoring seed or early age startups. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Pothula, and I really look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
So to start with, I would like to ask that what is the idea or mission behind the establishment of Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, or ATREE?
Yeah, ATREE as such, Ashoka Trust for Research in the Ecology and the Environment. It's a brainchild, I can call it, or it is a founder president, Dr. Kamaljeet Baba, Professor Baba, whom we call him as, in the early 90s, when he is revisited India. He is basically an Indian, but then he is an environmental biologist, globally renowned, and he started his research work back in India. And he started a program which is on biodiversity program, which is in the Western Ghats. So this was a project which was taken up in collaboration with Professor Ganeshaya and Professor Umashankar, who were the local, the collaborators to him. And then it's all started off, and their work has gained a lot of momentum in the Western Ghats, more specifically in the BRT, which is the Bilgiri Rangan Hills. And then as the momentum picked up and the way they have started, looking at the progress, which is rapidly expanding in terms of their study, they found that it needs to be institutionalized, because the work they're doing as research has to be institutionalized. And definitely looking into the kind of organizations at that point of time in India. Maybe today we see a lot of new age institutes talking about, interdisciplinarity and a kind of a different research. But at that point of time, there were no institute in India who was devoted exclusively for biodiversity study, which is as a whole. So most of the time, that different levels, if you have to study biodiversity, there were no institution which was talking about something like genetics to ecosystems, or linking science to policy, linking science to society. And in fact, most of these public institutions at that point of time, who are very big, very established institutions, they were more looking at biodiversity on a sectoral basis. So what I mean by sectoral basis is they were looking at biodiversity as a forestry, or as a wildlife, or as fisheries, or plants, or animals. So there is no organization which was looking at multiple dimensions, whereas biodiversity as such, as a subject, is something which has to be looked at in a larger perspective. And in fact, there is beyond biodiversity, what is the loss of biodiversity? No one was talking about. So that is where, in ecological perspective, a social perspective, economic and political aspects will come in. So that is where the study of Dr. Baba has come, and that was the root, or the base reason, or the idea behind trying to look at building an organization. So because the biodiversity decline is not being measured by anyone, biodiversity loss or decline, what we call it as. So in the case of, as I told you, in the case of the public institutions, the approach was different. So it has to be looked in a very nuanced approach. The approach which is truly what we call it as interdisciplinary, which is rooted in things like sociology, anthropology. Then you look at policy in terms of governance and all that. So that's where it shaped up the very idea for considering building an organization like ATREE. So that is the genesis of ATREE, just to keep it brief. But ATREE today, as we are doing, ATREE has got its own mission, and in terms of what it is meant for. So we always say very clearly that it's now, as you might be aware, it's a global non-profit organization that has worked in the socio-environmental issues, and both locally and globally at a policy level for over 2 decades. We are ranked among the top 20 global environmental policy think tanks, water security think tanks. That's what it is. But if you look at the mission of ATREE, mission is to generate rigorous interdisciplinary knowledge. And for what is the purpose? The purpose of achieving environmental conservation and sustainable development, and to enable the use of this knowledge by the policymakers and society, and basically train the next generation of environmental leaders. So ATREE today is positioned very uniquely because there are no such organization like ATREE, which is a think tank, because we are a think tank. We do extensive research in terms of biodiversity. In fact, we started out biodiversity, but eventually we moved to water and climate change because all of them are intertwined into each other. And we felt that that is how the overall ecology aspect has been taken care of. So if you look at the think tank aspect, we are the one who do a deep research in biodiversity, in conservation, in environment and development. And again, we also look at evidence-based research, which build the policies, such as a Center for Policy Design we have, and then also bringing in innovation in terms of social and environmental. That's another way of looking at it. So that's the think tank part of it, or the research organization part of it. Then we do have an academy. So ATREE's Academy again offers programs in PhD, which is an interdisciplinary program like what we spoke now, and they're very unique research programs, which is looking at the larger aspect of conservation practice. And we also started the master's program, which is again focused not just on the environmental studies, but looking at the hands-on learning in terms of how do the conservation practice can be implemented, both at the industry level, at the academy level, or for that matter, in the social sector. So that is the academy part of it. And then we have the grassroots level organization, which is a non-government organization, which works more with the communities, with the livelihoods, through our, what we call it as a community conservation centers. So we are uniquely positioned as an organization which has got three different, I don't say verticals, but the three different focus areas in terms of one is we are existing as a research organization, a think tank. We are an academia, and also we are a grassroots level NGO. So that is largely where the idea and the mission of ATREE is all about. Yeah.
Right, and I think wow, like you have clubbed all those different elements and aspects for like forming the vision and mission of the organization. As you have correctly said, that it's working in a very niche domain. It's very peculiar, the entire approach that you have undertaken, and the entire idea is very intriguing for all of us. So thank you so much for sharing the entire journey of ATREE with us, I mean, in such a comprehensive manner. So thank you so much. And moving forward, since you have talked about the mission and the purpose of the organization, so I would also like to know more about that. What are some of the key areas or key programs of ATREE that you are currently working on?
Yeah. So over the period, ATREE has evolved from, it started off with the biodiversity, as I mentioned, and conservation, and then eventually took up water, then we moved to climate change. That is the larger areas. But every year or on a frequent basis, we do relook at our strategic thematic areas of focus. So the thematic areas of focus, which is more relevant to the current times, is what we are working on. We have some 5 verticals we work on, and then there are horizontals. So when I say verticals, these are the areas, broadly, they're all under the umbrella of what we call it as a nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions are, just to make it very simpler, it is all about working with the biodiversity aspect of it, which is more, building on the nature's solutions. So our broad verticals are today, if you were biodiversity assessment and conservation is one. Then we have restoration of degraded landscapes. That is another vertical area which is quite seriously we are working on. And then we have water and society, which has always been close to our heart. We've been doing it. And then, of course, livelihood and community development, which happens in the conservation centers. And broader horizontals, which really cut across all these verticals, is again you have climate change, which cuts across, because all these aspects, whether you call it as a biodiversity and conservation, assessment of biodiversity, or you talk about restoration of degraded landscapes, or you talk about water, all of them, livelihood, they all have the climate changes. And we also use tools like eco-informatics, which is basically use of technology, using technologies like remote sensing, GIS, and things like that. And of course, the other one which I missed out in the vertical is the One Health. One Health is again a big thing, which is like basically, just to give you a very simple way, whether it's looking at a holistic view of a plant health, animal health, and the environmental health. So if we are looking at all the 3 elements, that is where the biodiversity is also taken care. So everywhere it has got a kind of, that's what I mentioned in the earlier one, they are intertwined and they're all connected with each other. So these are our broad verticals and horizontals we work. That are the key thematic focus areas. This encompasses the overall nature-based solutions is what I say.
Right. And I think there are a lot of areas that you are currently working on, and ATREE is doing some phenomenal work in all of those segments. And as you said, that there are interconnections, which is very important, that there are many areas that intersects and you have to wear that lens while working on that segment. So you are doing something really wonderful over there. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so now moving forward, I would also like to ask that how are you developing multifunctional landscapes in Northeast India that protect biodiversity, maintain the ecosystem with integrity, and promote the well-being of its people as well?
Yeah, so Northeast again is one of our major focus areas, in the sense
Right.
we have been working for the last 2.5 decades, since from the inception of ATREE, very actively in the Eastern Himalaya landscape, more specifically in Darjeeling, Sikkim, and of course, of late, the work has extended even look at what we call it as Northeast bioresources, mapping of the biodiversity of Northeastern states. So these are all the large, and we are also working on the national mission for biodiversity, where a lot of focus is there on the Northeastern states. In fact, the interventions of ATREE in this Eastern Himalayan belt is basically targeting at strategizing the development of, which basically helps in biodiversity conservation and human well-being. That's where the national mission we were talking about. And it establishes basically the economically and socially empowered local communities, and which is intended to build resilient institutions and human resources to meet the environmental challenge. This is a very broad area. What we actually do is we integrate these approaches in terms of adaptive resilience-based management of forests, which sounds big, but then basically if there are ecosystem services from the forest, each of the forests, and Northeast being rich in biodiversity, there are a lot of dependency on the ecosystem services. So we try to understand and research and interact with the communities and understand what is the proximity of this reserved forests, or what kind of protected areas. If you look at an example there, we work on the Singalila National Park, or if you look at wildlife sanctuary of Senchal Wildlife Sanctuaries, there's a lot of dependence on the ecosystem services. Just to give you what is ecosystem services, is something, what the nature as an ecosystem provides for the people in the form of tangible benefits, or like, such as fuel wood or fodder or clean drinking water, or these are all these basically the kind of ecosystem services. And then there are also intangible ones, which is like, the entire landscape itself, the aesthetics of the biodiversity there, right? Appreciation of the recreation services. When I say recreation, it's like we're trying to see how we can protect the biodiversity and it have ecotourism kind of things, right? Ecotourism or traveling, and that helps the overall recreation service. This is a framework which is again largely include the measurement, the condition of the forests, basically in terms of ecosystem functioning, and understand how these ecosystem services support and achieve the human well-being. Because what we felt is, if the human well-being or the bodily health aspirations of the locals, because we work with the local indigenous community and work on their aspirations and concern for their species. So what are the native species and how do we protect them, whether the households are able to achieve that minimal level of these capabilities by using the ecosystem services. And we also look at the well-being and the sustenance of ecosystem services, and how it actually, the process functioning of it, and what is the flow of these services. So our research highlights some of the key social attributes. When I say that, functions such as adaptive governance, so where the local community comes together and protect their biodiversity, at the same time look at how to build a livelihood. And transformation in terms of learning and capabilities, how the transformability can happen, and for maintaining resilience, especially in the face of these changes, such as land use. The land use changes are happening with the development. Again, the land use as a challenge, climate and uncertainties. We've seen a lot of uncertainties in the form of shocks and disturbances, which is very common to that landscape. So that is where we do. And when you talk about managing the forest for the biodiversity and the human well-being as a change is happening. So that is one area. We do have a lot of integrated approaches enhance the livelihood and sustainability of the communities within and around, the protected areas or the forest lands. For that matter, there are a lot of reserves in that vicinity. And then, which comes naturally, is also the human-wildlife interactions. How do you look at the human-wildlife conflicts and bring in that? And beyond all this, which is now gaining a lot of momentum, is the citizen science for documenting biodiversity. So when you take about the Northeast bioresources, if you're able to document the inventorize the entire bioresources, which is known to be the hotspot of the biodiversity, global hotspots of biodiversity, citizen science is very critical, because the involvement of the indigenous community and the locals in terms of protecting their biodiversity and thereby building their livelihood is very critical. And that's where citizen science for documenting biodiversity is allowed. So this is how our interventions come in the Northeast, like, in terms of developing that multifunctional landscape. So we call it as a place-based approach, or we call a landscape-based or a place-based research, looking into the overall aspects of their development, their livelihood, and of course, in terms of building the protecting the biodiversity. That's a little large, but that's in a nutshell to make it simpler.
But I think it's really interesting, the entire idea behind this intervention. It's very refreshing to hear that you are addressing so many problems with, like the approach that you have taken and the strategy that you have developed. It's so interconnected that you are not just solving one problem at a time. You're addressing the problem of their livelihood, then ensuring the sustainability, biodiversity, all of these problems that are in the mainstream. You are targeting all of that in a very holistic manner. So that's really beautiful to hear. And thank you for sharing that with us. And now going forward, the next question that I have for you is that what are the community-based conservation centers, or CCCs as they're called, and how do they ensure the well-being and sustainable living in various landscapes?
Yeah. So like the very name suggests, community conservation centers, or what we call it as a community-based conservation centers, they're more like, research stations or field stations, which are based in that given community. And mostly in the domain, in the areas where we work intensively, which is in the Western Ghats and the Eastern Himalayas. There, where we do research, they produce research very much pertinent to the usable of the local communities, and basically providing them a space for local communities to engage with us. So what it means is that the local communities have to be engaged and participate in the conservation of their landscapes and their biodiversity, or their natural resources. So the initiatives we have multiple initiatives. We have 5 working CCCs, community conservation centers, spread across Western Ghats and Eastern Himalayas. If you look at it, starts down south in Agatsamalai, which is Kalkad Munundare Tiger Reserve in Tirunelveli area, that is in Tamil Nadu. Then we have this Bilgiri Rangaswamy Temple Tiger Reserve, what we call BRT Hills. And then we have in the wetlands, which is in the down again in Kerala, in the backwaters near Aleppi. This is Vembanad community. We call it as a community environmental resource center, because they do some work even in the larger beyond the regulars one. And then the Malya Mahadeshwara Hills, which is Hills Service Center. And the Eastern Himalayas is spread across, basically in Darjeeling, and then the work spans up to Sikkim. And these are the 5 CCCs. So what we do in each of these, as the name we were talking about many a times, it's a landscape-based, place-based research. So in the Northeast, we just spoke a moment back in terms of, how do you really look at their livelihood and understand the multifunctional landscapes that protect the biodiversity, and then maintain these ecosystems with integrity, and then kind of look at the well-being of the people. So regional biodiversity and ecosystem services supporting the development is very critical. There is a major emphasis on enhancing the regional science policy in terms of, if you look at the Eastern Himalayas, they work closely with the regional science policy interface. Basically look at the governance part of it. They strengthen the governance and institutions for coping with the environmental change. And then including climate-induced disaster risk. So basically the disaster management is also another area, because in all this, one thing which comes out with biodiversity is how do you really link biodiversity with the disaster risk? Because if you look at, just to give you, in all these Eastern Himalayas or the hilly terrains, or for that matter, with the kind of degradation happening, there's a high risk of landslides, or it can be various other things, calamities which we're facing of late. This is a disaster risk. So this is basically contributing towards building capacity, promoting sustainable livelihoods, conservation planning, and improving the agriculture. So agriculture also comes broadly in this area. That is one thing. And then in terms of Agasamalai, we do a lot of community conservation education in all of our CCCs. One thing which has been an emphasis area of late is how do you really educate the local communities, which includes the student community, which includes the youth there in terms of conservation education, because conservation education is very critical for people to understand. That's what we call it as a citizen science or a public engagement, and through which a lot of activities. So we do that activities. And then of course, in terms of how to look at a little more deeper in biodiversity, something like, the plant systematics, how the phenology. So in Kalakand Munandirai, which is again a richest hotspot of biodiversity, we do a lot of phenology, long-term phenology studies, which works on the vegetation dynamics and what is the plant and animal interactions and things like that. Community dependence on forest, wetlands, because these are all very unique landscapes. They have all the things. They have wetlands, they have grasslands, they have dry deciduous kind of forest, all of them. So we kind of go into the local landscape, do a research, help them how to really protect them, and look at their livelihood too. In one of the areas we're working for a very long term is the BRT again, along with all the other ones, which is Biligari Rangan Hills, what we call it. That is again, we work with the local community, which is one of the biggest contributions from ATREE is that we work with the Soliga community there through long-term monitoring of forest produce, what they call it as non-timber forest produce, NTFPs. We work on trying to bring that sustainable in terms of livelihood, and basically the focus there has been to encourage the local farmers to practice, including organic farming, and training them in techniques, basically in terms of how to improve the crop yield. And this happens in most of our CCCs, wherever there is a strong agriculture component. And of course, there are also resources like, honeybees and honey production, depending on the local produce there. That is what we call it as a non-timber forest products. It happens and of course, one of the biggest menace of the invasive species, which all of you would have heard about, is on the Lantana camara, lantana, which is a weed which is actually destroying the forests completely by its massive expansion. So Hills, we do have a center which works with this, and then it develops artisans we have kind of helped them to build their own livelihood by training the local, again, the Soliga community, in terms of making furniture with this lantana weed. And in fact, we have won a lot of accolades and recognitions in terms of, trying to, from weeds to wealth is one, which is the recent one we got, where we are talking about the community trying to learn the skill of the craft of, the furniture making with lantana, and making it the livelihood more sustainable. So, of course, this includes the honey processing, which is happening in BR Hills, and it goes without saying on the other organic farming and all that. So this is where we take pride. We are very unique because these community-based conservation centers are our living labs, which we call it, where it happens. And each of our, as we talk about our academy, maybe as we move, all the researchers at ATREE, the deep research, which happens in our 4 centers. Center for Environment and Development, or Center for Biodiversity and Conservation. And of course, the 2 new centers, which are in the downstream and the upstream, which are basically Center for Social and Environmental Innovation, and the upstream, which is basically evidence-based research to influence the policymakers, which is Center for Policy Design. All these centers, the core of the research, the core of the connect with the community, the grassroots level connect, is something which is happening in our community conservation centers. So that's where the community conservation centers play a very critical role in ATREE's, and we take pride in them because we are there in these landscapes, and we do work in other landscapes also in a smaller way, like for example in grasslands and bunny grasslands, and areas where we do research that can be in a short term or a long term monitoring. But these are the centers, the 5 centers where we are having a very strong long-term presence with the community connect, working on with them with the livelihoods. That's about the CCCs. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think we can see the pride and emotions that you have while sharing that, because a lot of work is happening from ATREE, like for different verticals. And I think it's not that you have just started multiple programs. All of them, each of them are very holistic and wholesome in nature. So you are doing a lot of research, a lot of work in different verticals, and it's really, I'm like really glad to hear that. So thank you for putting that out for us. And moving forward to the last question for today, as you have mentioned about ATREE Academy in the
Mm.
beginning as well, I would like to ask that how does ATREE Academy work towards creating the next generation of environmental leaders?
Yeah, so ATREE Academy, as I mentioned, is again a very unique place, the sense that we all know that we are not a degree or an award, granting institution. So we are an academy which is focused on research, and true to its the philosophy and the mission of ATREE, of producing interdisciplinary knowledge. We have a completely unique interdisciplinary cohort of people. So the PhD programs, the research programs offered at ATREE is on the conservation practice, which is unlike, and then we have students from all the domains. So it was one of its unique programs where we have people from the social science background, from the natural science background, which is very unique for ATREE, because in most of the public institutions, it's predominantly they are focused on biodiversity or conservation from the natural sciences perspective. Whereas we at ATREE, we look at in the holistic perspective, like I told, it can be, like I was mentioning earlier, it can be ecological, social, economic, political, as well as all the aspects. And at the same time, they should be rooted in these aspects of sociology, anthropology, policy, and governance, and all that. So the PhD programs in ATREE are very unique. So we have been offering PhD programs for over more than a decade, with around more than 50 researchers passing out as with PhD programs spread across. They are all working in various prestigious projects, right from the academia to think tanks to social sectors, and that they to take pride in their work because they're very unique in terms of that. They work in the domain of ecology, the environment, and of course, in the new age, sustainability, the environment, and governance. Social governance is another one. These are the ones we do. And then recently we started the cohort in the master's program, again, which is a very unique one because we offer a program which is focused on conservation practice. So conservation practice is again not just a study, but then it is all about how do they really go and implement these programs. So it's since from the inception in 2009, the academy has almost, as I told you, close to 50. I mean, if you take it, the current ones, but 35 PhDs are very much as scholars. They worked across more than 50 odd projects and across big biodiversity hotspots, spread across hotspots of, in fact, they worked across the globe and 35 global.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is the pride of ATREE's alumni who work from the conservation practice. And because we provide opportunity in terms of that cutting edge research on natural and social sciences, again, through the CCCs, which I mentioned a while ago, in both Western Ghats and Eastern Himalayas, that we stand again much apart, very unique from any other organization or institution offering that. So we also offer in the academy certain certification programs which are designed for professionals, of course, for practitioners and for the policymakers. This is again through advocacy groups or works in field of environment. Sometimes, we also have the Indian Forest Service probationers coming and doing a quick course here. I mean, they undergo a program before that. We do train engineers from the water resource management from different state bodies. And of course, we also have the remote sensing GIS programs. And apart from that, ATREE Academy and ATREE as a whole attracts a lot of students in terms of exchange. And basically what I mean to say is that the uniqueness of our interdisciplinary research and being the one of the global think tanks in environmental policy, we do have a lot of exchange happening with faculty from different parts of the world. That's a visiting faculty coming in, sometimes students coming in for the exchange programs. So, ATREE Academy is a very vibrant place because of its presence, which has got a access and, blend of both the grassroots level connect in terms of understanding the communities and the livelihoods in the community conservation centers, and of course, access to the research, world-class, the dedicated research happening in our centers, the 4 centers which I mentioned. So that's how the ATREE Academy stands very unique, and which is truly interdisciplinary. In fact, I always say that we have been hearing about interdisciplinarity in the recent past, but in the new age universities, which are less than a decade old. But we are talking about ATREE from the more than 25 years. We have been the pioneers in giving the interdisciplinary knowledge, or trying to be sharing that knowledge, building that, and true to our mission, we are committed for developing environmental leaders. So that's where the ATREE Academy very proudly stands out, telling that we produced and we kind of developed environmental leaders. Yeah.
Right. And I think just like your programs that you have mentioned, all of the courses that you have talked about, they are also very unique, very niche in nature. They are catering to a large, like a very niche audience, I would say. But
Yeah.
the quality that you are maintaining to create such environmental leaders is very commendable.
Yeah.
So I think with that, it brings our interview to a close. And I would like to thank you for sharing your thoughts, your insights, and your experiences with us. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's nice connecting with you and share what ATREE does and ATREE's focus areas are. Yes, I've not dealt much into the details of our programs when I say that, whether it's a water and what we do. I didn't get into the technicalities, but I was broadly trying to say what we cover, ATREE as an organization, and in terms of our thematic focus areas, which I was mentioning.
Right.